I've been in bad rooms before. Rooms where the air itself felt like a warning. Rooms where the furniture was arranged wrong, and you couldn't explain why until you noticed the lock was on the outside of the door. This hallway wasn't a room, but it had that same feeling, that breathless, suffocating certainty that someone had designed this moment specifically for you. I kept my feet planted and looked at the figure at the end of the corridor. "You know my name," I said. "That puts you ahead of me." The figure didn't move. "Aurelio," the voice said finally. "My name is Aurelio Vance." He stepped forward then, out of the shadow, and the yellow hallway light fell across him like an accusation. He was older than his voice suggested, maybe 60, maybe more. His grey coat was expensive, the kind that gets more beautiful the older it gets. Fine wool with no visible lint, belted at the waist. His face was angular, sharp cheekbones, a jaw like carved stone, silver hair swept back from a high forehead. His eyes were pale, not blue exactly, more like the colour of ice at the edges of a frozen river. Clear and cold and very, very still. He looked like a man who had never panicked in his life, and somehow that was the most frightening thing about him. "You've been asking about room 114, he said. It wasn't a question. "My sister is missing." "She is not your sister." "Close enough," I said. Something moved in his face then, not quite a smile, the shadow of one, maybe, like he appreciated the answer without being willing to admit it. "Walk with me," he said. "I'd rather stand here." "Mr. Dresch." His voice dropped half a tone, gentle almost, the way you speak to someone standing on a ledge. "If you stand there pressing your hand against that wall, you will attract exactly the kind of attention that will make finding your close enough sister considerably more difficult." I looked at the wall, at the warm plaster, at the lighthouse painting with its churning painted sea. Then I followed Aurelio Vance. He led me out a side door I hadn't noticed. A grey metal door near the fire exit, unmarked, propped open half an inch with a folded paper matchbook. Outside was a narrow service alley, brick walls on both sides, close enough to touch. A dumpster with a broken lid, the smell of old cooking grease and yesterday's rain on stone. The dishwater sky pressed down on everything. Aurelio stood with his back to the brick wall and folded his hands in front of him like a man about to deliver a lecture. "How much do you actually know?" he asked. "I know Marisol texted me 11 days ago from inside that hotel," I said. "I know she said she found something. I know the police were handed footage they didn't question hard enough. And I know that room 114 is on the hotel's check-in records. I saw it in their online booking system before the listing disappeared 3 days ago." Aurelio's expression didn't change, but something in his stillness shifted, a barely visible tightening around the eyes. "You saw the listing?" "Screenshotted it," I said, before it vanished. He was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. I counted. "She should not have contacted you," he said at last. "Why not?" "Because now you're here. That's generally what happens when someone I care about disappears." He looked at me for a long moment. His pale eyes moved across my face like he was reading something written there in very small print. "Room 114, he said, "does not officially exist. It never has. It is not on any blueprint filed with the city. It is not wired to the hotel's electrical grid. It does not appear on any fire safety inspection document going back 40 years. I stared at him. "Then, what is it?" "A room that belongs to someone who does not want it found." "Who?" He turned and looked at the far end of the alley, like he'd heard something, like he was checking. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a card. Plain white, no logo. A phone number in small black print. Nothing else. He held it out. "There is a woman," he said. "Her name is Celestin Borr. She knows more about this building than anyone alive. Find her before nightfall today." I took the card. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. Aurelio Vance buttoned the top button of his coat, even though it wasn't cold. "Because," he said quietly, "Marisol Vega is not the first person to disappear inside that room." He walked back through the side door. It clicked shut behind him. The latch caught with a sound like a small bone snapping. I stood alone in the alley with a card that had no name on it, and a building at my back that was warm where it shouldn't have been. I sat in my truck for 6 minutes before I trusted myself to drive. Marisol had found something. Something connected to a room that officially did not exist. Someone had gone to serious effort to make that room invisible, not just to me, not just to the police, but to the entire administrative record of this city. That kind of invisibility doesn't happen by accident. That's not a landlord cutting corners. That's an operation. And Aurelio Vance, a man in an expensive coat who knew my name and knew Marisol's and knew exactly what I'd seen when I pressed my hand against that wall, had handed me a card and a name instead of answers, which meant either he was genuinely trying to help, or he was steering me somewhere specific. I looked at the card. Celestin Borr. I typed the name into my phone. Nothing. No social media, no business listings, no news mentions, no digital footprint at all. In this era, that was almost impossible, unless someone had worked very hard to make sure she couldn't be found, or unless she had worked very hard to make sure. I started the truck. I had until nightfall. I found her at 4:40 in the afternoon, in a place I never would have thought to look if it hadn't been for an 8-year-old boy with a kite and a loose tongue. But that's a story for the next breath, because right now, I need to tell you what I found when I pulled up the hotel's old records at the county archive, the physical ones, the ones nobody had bothered to digitize. Because in the 1987 guest register, handwritten in faded blue ink, someone had checked into room 114, and they had never checked out. And the name in the register was mine. Calloway Dresch. 40 years before I was born. You thought you understood this story. You don't. Everything Calloway believed about that room, the warmth behind the wall, the tapping, the name in the 1987 register, he had it wrong. Not slightly wrong, completely wrong. Because here is what nobody told him, what Celestin never put on that wall, what Aurelio Vance has been protecting for 30 years, is not a secret about the room. It is a secret about Calloway, who he really is, why his name was in that register before he was born, and why the room did not take Marisol by accident. It took her to get to him. The room was never the trap. Calloway was. And in episode 3, he finds out. The door opens from the inside, but not every door leads back out. Episode 3 is coming. Subscribe, hit the bell, do not miss this one. Because once Calloway walks through that door, Nothing in this story will ever be the same again.